but we're now going to start our hot seat conversations, and we're going to invite Martin Brennan. Would you please come up and sit there next to Robert Martin as our first contestant, if you like. Martin is the CEO of ICLEI, which is the Global Local Governments for Sustainability organisation. He might want to just introduce it better than I have. But to ask her to pose a question?
Pose a question, perhaps put forward what I would want to take to Rio+20. Can I preface it by quoting the United Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who said that the current economic model is a global suicide pact. And he also said that we needed revolutionary thinking and action that can lift people out of poverty while protecting ecosystems. And for me and for the organisation I work for, we recognise the difficulties and the challenge that we have, but we also recognise the opportunities. So while local government and ICLEI will take stories from over 1,300 cities from around the world, representing over 500 million people in 73 countries, we will take those stories as the stories we've heard this evening, and I think it's been a wonderful sense of engagement and conversation. We will take those stories to Rio. So what do we want? We have to respond to those two issues that has been mentioned, a green economy and institutional frameworks for sustainable development internationally. So we have to take that as the themes, and we have to take the challenge of Ban Ki-moon. So what is ICLEI calling for? One, we're calling for a UN decade of sustainable urbanisation. Sustainable urbanisation. 2/3 of the population of this planet will live in urban areas. It took us 4,000 years to get the urban capacity we have now, and we need to increase that to be able to achieve that in the next 40 years. In other words, it's taken us 4,000 years to get where we are. We've only got 40 years now to deliver the urban capacity that we now have. That's a challenge. So we need to build cities. We need to build cities that are not locked into the current lifestyles of resource intensity and dependency on fossil fuels. We need to build our urban capacity. We need to take the advantage of what we are going to build and what we have built. Secondly, we need cities to be the hub of green growth. We need to focus on cities because cities is where the action is, and I believe that with support from other national and subnational governments we can achieve that. We need sustainable development goals, clear goals that are verifiable, reportable and in fact able to be assessed in terms of their achievement. And they need to be linked to the Millennium Development Goals that deals with poverty issues around the world. And finally, we need a redefinition of the United Nations to united actors, National governments, nation states are only part of the solution. We need to recognise levels of government, civil society, business and trade unions, because it's only those actors that will actually achieve the outcomes. What we don't call for is another declaration. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Some comments, come on. Response. Robert?
Well, you will get another declaration. There is a much greater emphasis in this outcomes document on the role of business in the commercial sector than there was 20 years ago. So, again, I think that that's a realistic step forward.
How do you feel about these three objectives that Martin's outlined?
Oh, how can you argue against poverty alleviation? And, the objectives are fine, and cities are part of the solution. You know, there was a view that big cities were bad. Actually, big cities can be good. They can be good in terms of sustainability, and you can better utilise energy and water and provide education and health at a higher standard. So there's a change in global attitude in relation to cities and the importance of cities as a positive within the sustainability debate. But of course, you've got to build them in that way. Yeah. You've got to build sustainability into these cities, or even more complicated is to try to retrofit them.
I was going to come back to Geoff on that. So,
into the cities.
Geoff and Kate, are there examples of better practice? Are you seeing them in regional Victoria?
We are. Could I just say, abandon all declarations, anathema to a lawyer. Oh my God! But we are seeing really interesting conversations being had. For instance, in Horsham, in an evening just like this, with fewer people than are here tonight, the mayor of Horsham talked about why Horsham, which is a flat town, didn't have a better bike plan, and really wanted to be upfront about people bicycling around Horsham. So my point about the 3 points, I suppose, is I accept all of them. They are, of course, all absolutely of great merit, but it would be nice if we thought about urban capacity as extending to some of those smaller and regional towns, and you know, Bendigos and the Ballarats and etc.
Chris, comment?
I liked his remark about I like Martin's remark about actors, because as citizens we're all actors, and what we've been partly talking about all evening is actually being citizens, constructive participants in a community, not sitting down and waiting for them to do it, but every one of us is involved in working toward a greener, more sustainable, more survivable planet.
And Geoff, I was going to ask you, one of my sort of little ideas is, I mean, Melbourne to me has the capacity to become a centre of excellence in green building. We've got some remarkable examples, beginning with Peter Zentl's building probably. We've now got a wave of them coming through. There are some very good examples of the sort of things that Martin's talking about in our city now, aren't there?
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate for a moment?
Well, I give credit to the Green Building Council of Australia, and I give credit to the former Docklands Authority, actually, who really started there with seeking to push for new standards in new office construction. The Green Building Council of Australia was formed to essentially take international examples of best practice in building. In the United States, the scheme called LEED; in the United Kingdom, a scheme called BREEAM, and create a star rating system here. That CH2 and the Peter Zentl's building that Rob referred to were in the vanguard of demonstrating sort of best practice against that rating system. And that has now been incorporated into the Melbourne planning scheme. So all new commercial buildings of any size have to achieve a minimum 4-star rating system. And what we've seen is that actual practice has gone past that, so that 5-star is perhaps more commonplace for new buildings. A really important decision that was taken about 2 years ago by COAG was to require mandatory disclosure of existing buildings at the time of sale or lease of their energy efficiency rating, a system called NABERS. So this has now become part of the lexicon of the property industry and is a significant motivator for those who want to keep their property competitive. Now, our 1200 Buildings program comes into that space to enable people to keep up to date. Now, we know not all of them are actually members of the program, but we know there are about 120 retrofit projects being either undertaken or seriously considered around the city right now. So 10% of that target is already starting to move. Back onto cities, one thing I haven't mentioned is that as part of Melbourne City Council's journey of trying to understand what it can do, it not only has been assisted by its relationship with ICLEI and the vast network Martin mentioned, but also a network called C40, which was created in 2005 by the then Mayor of London, and it was actually 20 cities. It was an attempt to try and get big metropolitan local governments together to collectively assist each other to tackle climate change. Melbourne was invited to be part of that, even though we're a tiny municipality compared to the London metropolitan area, the New York metropolitan area and so forth. But we were asked to be part of it because we were seen to be small but interesting. basically, that there were some interesting, innovative things going on here which were scalable upwards. That initial group of 20 cities has now grown to 80. And we'll be hosting a small network meeting of 22 cities in a month's time to work on methodologies for sustainable communities. So I think I only mention that to say that you should feel proud that your local government is actually stepping up into these spaces and being noticed for trying to do a few things. That in turn brings relevance brings capacity and intelligence, and we keep it going.
Good.
Rob, can I just make another comment about green growth? Because of course it also involves contraction, and it involves what we've heard all over the state about waste being seen as a resource, and local government being one of the great drivers of that new way of understanding the waste economy. And I can't let the evening go by without just talking about something that happened in Portland. Any of you who've been in country Victoria and probably in your own streets and looked at the number of televisions on the footpath have said to yourself, why is that happening? In Portland, they knew that there would be a lot of televisions that wouldn't go anywhere but into landfill, and they decided to do something about it. And the Portland Sustainability Group, with its partners down there, decided that they would in fact call for a depot. The depot received televisions, and they thought they might have to get the rotary trailer, one of those little trailers, to take the televisions down to the other depot in Hamilton. 26 tonnes later, they got the local logistics people to assist them with a front-end loader, and they took all of the televisions from Portland straight to Warrnambool, cutting out the visit to Hamilton that would have made for more carbon miles. That's driven by local people who thought about waste as a resource, green contraction, green growth. It's the same thing and can be seen in that way.
Well, we're starting to deal with e-waste. Now, thank you, Martin. I might get you to relinquish your seat now, and Geoff's going to help me identify our next hot seat person. I know that, yes, the young lady there, please come up, sit down, meet Robert Hill. Very good. Now you need to tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Katie Wood and I'm a student at Melbourne University.
What have you got to say, Katie?
I have kind of come up as a representative of youth, such as just like Ellen. And my kind of main focus is on obviously education and the youth, and the two main things that I wanted to focus on.
What are you studying at Melbourne?
Just arts.
Good. No, not just arts.
Sorry, arts. Arts.
Studying arts. We look forward to seeing you as Prime Minister one day.
The two things that I wanted to focus on was education first and also facilitation. So when I speak to my friends, I've just gotten back from South Africa doing some conservation work, and I've always been someone who was very environmentally conscious, but through my education, doing my conservation work, I realised I developed further appreciation for the environment and started to really care about the individual species of plants, not just because they served me as a filter and gave me oxygen, but also because I began to respect the actual individual plant. And I come back here, and now, although before I was going to my farm every year and planting trees, now I'm riding everywhere. Like, I will not use my car. My boyfriend hates me for it, but I will ride to his house even if he's driving next to me.
Education.
Yeah, exactly. And all my friends, when I try to tell them that they should be part of this, not only do they not know enough about it, they don't know how they can help, but also they say to me, oh, it's so hard. I can't be bothered taking public transport. It's raining, that kind of thing. And it frustrates me because I would really like to know what the government's going to do about pushing the youths to do it, because that is the future.
Ooh, I might come back to you on this, Alan, because I'm sure you hear this.
I have a question. I have a response, I guess. So I guess our motto at the AYCC is that we're about advocacy, and the reason why we're about advocacy, not that we don't think education is important, and we definitely do education, but it's for exactly that feeling that you're feeling, which is that I turned off my lights and my brother didn't turn off his lights, or the McDonald's down the road's got all their fluorescent lights on, and I ride my bike but nobody else does, and the government's not doing anything, and I feel so disempowered. And that's the reason why we say what we try and get young people to do is actually come together to advocate as a bloc, essentially, to government and say, it's our future, we need you to be acting. We're going to act too, of course. It's not just for the government, but we need to be doing the advocacy, and it can be challenging. People sometimes say, oh, I don't want to talk to the government, or something political, you know, you don't like to have political conversations with your friends, but it's so important because otherwise you get this feeling of just being completely disempowered.
Helplessness, yeah.
Attitudinal change is very complicated. You know. One of the phenomena we've experienced is that we encourage people to adopt more efficient light bulbs, for example, low energy, and they leave them on for longer.
Yeah. Yes, they got off the hook by
I think
buying
they
them.
fix the problem by buying the light bulb, and they don't bother about turning them off.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is join the 65,000 at AYCC and get some tips on how do you go about this. Kate, regional Victoria, is this a common issue with young people or not?
We're seeing some fantastic stuff in people who are probably the generation after you. We're seeing some extraordinary stuff in little schools, in big schools, in schools that aren't part of the sustainability program, that are just doing it, that say we don't need to be part of a government program, we're doing it, with teachers who are drivers and parents who are drivers and people who are part of the Environmental Farmers Network and go after the Hindmarsh project and then put their kids in the Canova Secondary College, where they recycle everything from Bibles to glasses frames, you know. So we're seeing some really unevenness about it, and yeah, it's very difficult. I accept it's difficult, but there's some fantastic stuff being done.
So where do we hear these models? Where can you find out more about these models? We can copy them and replicate them.
Yeah, well, you'll find them if you link up with people who are doing it. That's the participation exercise that we're seeing.
And I think, can I just make another point about education? Definitely not against education, so don't take this the wrong way, but I think sometimes we do say we need education as a bit of a cop-out. I think Robert's right, attitudinal change is really complicated and it's about human psychology, and I think we often look at a huge problem, we say, wow, this problem is really big. We need education. If everyone just thought like me, if everyone was just as educated as me, they'd change their behaviour and would be fine, but it's not always the case. There are big policy changes that we can make, not without the education, but I think we do need to be focusing on those things rather than just saying, oh, you know, education will solve it.
But education in a broader sense, now energy efficiency should be the easiest option of all, because you know, theoretically you get a win-win outcome. It's good for the environment and it saves you money. But in practice, it's been very hard to.
You're saying some very encouraging
implement.
things as a former Liberal member, Robert, I must say tonight.
Yeah, well, former Liberal member. Now now I got out my choice. But so in the built environment, we believed that change wasn't occurring at the pace we wanted to see because of financial issues, the so-called market failure. We found out that it wasn't so much that, it was that people didn't understand what they could do, how it would, you know, how easy it was, what tools were available, what professional assistance is there, who they should go to, so people don't do it. So education is a broad concept. It's not just sort of an intellectual exercise.
Chris,
it's a sharing of best information, and there's still enormous scope for a useful sharing of information to contribute to a better outcome.
And it's about the empowerment. It's not just education as in, here, have this fact. It's about empowering them as to actually what they can do, like the facilitation, yeah.
Yeah, Chris, you made comments about education before. Is this the sort of sense of what you...
It's exactly the sense of what I was after. I mean, I've met very successful lawyers who left all the lights on in their houses despite their education.
They did not, did they?
But what we're after is the broadest sense of education, which involves voluntary networks, communication to friends, spreading it everywhere you can, so that people can realise, oh golly, yeah, I don't need that.
But it's hard because when it's just your own voice, just the one voice amongst all your friends, it is quite difficult. And I think that as much as Kate, it is fantastic that there are all these initiatives, all the specific initiatives that are doing so well. It's not those people that I think is necessary to focus on now, although encouragement for those kind of things is great. It's the people who aren't doing anything. And a lot of my friends, like I said to my friend the other day, I was talking about something to do with climate change, because it's the only thing I talk about at the moment. And my friend said, is that still happening?
Change your friends.
And I was like, yeah.
Now, that's funny you should mention that, because I got exactly the same response from a general manager of a television station in 1990. But anyway, thank you for being with us. There is a big audience here too, and other people are going to see you because you're recording tonight, so maybe that's part of the broader education, and you might find some other compatriots in the audience that you can work with tonight as well. Thank you for being here. Now, I know Rob Turk's here. Is Rob here? Well, you going to join the hot seat, Rob? Yes, sure. If you would. Now, I know Rob, but he's going to tell us who he is and what he does.
Good evening, everyone. So my name's Rob Turk. I'm a sustainability consultant. I've been working in the field for 15, 16 years. My question, or my comment...
And you work for an international
consulting firm, but I'm here as a citizen, if you like. So my comment is more of a reflection on someone who's been working in the industry for the past 15 to 16 years. And it's really when I was an enthusiastic undergraduate, such as our previous speaker, one of the things that struck me in the environmental science field was that climate change was just one of a whole range of different issues that we were looking at. So there's something called acid rain and the death of the Black Forest in Germany, and there was problems with salinity throughout, especially rural areas, issues such as the hole in the ozone layer. And climate change was just one small issue. And when I talk to people about what I do as a sustainability consultant, often they have no idea what I do. They can't understand it. But I talk about climate change, and there's general awareness, especially from the Al Gore movie, and people understand and can reference that. The whole point of that story, if you like, was that the Rio Earth Summit, the original one, addressed a whole range of sustainability issues. And when you look at what's planned for the coming Rio Earth Summit, it's also addressing a whole range of sustainability issues. And I think maybe the comment I'd be looking for is how do we change the conversation, or how do we broaden the current conversation? Because there is I think, and the previous comment about, is climate change over yet? Have we fixed that? Climate change is one of a whole range of issues, and they're obviously all interlinked. But I'd be interested just to have a reflection or some thoughts on that.
Case in point, 2010 was the International Year of Biodiversity under UNEP, and I think that all the reports came back from what we said we were going to do in 2000 or 2002, and the report was we achieved nothing in a decade. In fact, everything's got worse. So, and biodiversity, I think, is the one. With respect to buildings and all the good things we're doing in cities, we still have a global crisis in biodiversity, which is the issue that seems to be slipping through the net. So, well, come on, Commissioner, you're reporting on a whole range of issues, yeah?
And we are, and we will be, and we'll be reporting on the impact that climate change is going to have on biodiversity, and that's a connection, and that's the connecting thread. I think, can I just make a comment about reporters, though, the sort of people who do my job? I think we've been pretty bad at what we do. I don't think we've been necessarily as helpful as we should have been, and there's been a real upsurge of all of us saying we need to get better at communicating the message. And I just want to share one thing about some of the stuff we've done around Victoria, which is to take out the State of the Climate report out of the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO, and many of you will have seen it, and it's a 5-page A4 if you look at the hard copy, but if you get on the website, it's a bit difficult to get up if you've got dial-up at Ararat. The reality for us was that we took the hard copy around and we had it and the Low Carbon Growth Plan, and both of those documents are extraordinarily useful and interesting. But the Low Carbon Growth Plan is something you really do need to think about to read. The State of the Climate report is a document that you can pick up and you can use. And CSIRO, when they talk to us about that science communication, say we worked for 10 years to get that report to look like it did. We worked for 10 years to think about the white space and the material in it, and we worry about whether we oversimplified it, and we're still anxious about that. But nevertheless, they got it out there. And when we put that on the table around Victoria, that's the document that walks off the table. And it walks off the table for a number of reasons, and I don't know what they all might be, but you can physically see people observe that the two logos are up there, the authoritative logos of the Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO, and people say that is an authoritative report. I don't think that there is what some people say, a sense that scientists are all engaged in a conspiracy and they're all befuddling us. I don't think people necessarily think that. I think scientists can feel good about that, much better than they do. But I think we've been poor communicators and we need to be better at it. From a reporter's point of view, that's what we need to do. Apart from all my participation observations, we've got a lot of work to get our own house in order.
That's the document that got my dad worried about climate change.
Is that right?
He looked at it and it said the climate of Mildura, where we live, is going to be the climate of Wilcannia. And he said, oh my God, that's awful. We need to do something.
Yeah, well, let's both tell Kevin Hennessy that it was well received. Yeah.
Did you know the document that we're referring to? Some of you? No? Well, we should get it.
Yeah.
It's only about 6 pages. It's a wonderful synthesis of global science, and as Kate says, from the CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology, who probably have worked really. I see John Zillman's here. Probably John worked together really well since that great big computer was craned into Lonsdale Street a couple of decades ago.
He's laughing.
Yeah, but it really is. They put an enormous amount of work into just really distilling the science and making it very, very accessible, right down to the colours of the diagrams, which diagrams, and it's a terrific example of how science can be communicated. So, Graham, I don't know what we do as UNAA or the city. People might be interested in getting it.
Can I make another comment? I know I talk too much, but the other thing that we did in our rounds of talking to people is I made a lot of assumptions. I made assumptions that people didn't need to see that document. I made assumptions that people could get onto the internet. I made assumptions that people knew about that document. I made a lot of assumptions. It didn't take me very long in the first trip from Mildura to Macedon during the floods to realise those assumptions needed to be ruptured, and I needed to think about what I thought I was doing. And I'm not stupid, but I certainly made a lot of assumptions, and we do. And you need to, if you haven't seen that document, it's not that it's anybody's fault that you haven't seen that document. It's our issue, and we certainly adjusted our behaviour. We involved ourselves in some behavioural change to try and do better, and we need to do more.
Can I come back to biodiversity? Go on, Robert.
Well, on biodiversity, climate change is hard because people can't touch and feel it, and I disagree a little bit with the expert, because I think things that people can identify with more easily can be very useful tools for a bigger gain. Now, you can get people together to save the bettong or save the woylie, but they do that by saving the forest. Yeah. To save the forest, you've actually got to address water issues. You've got to address the consequences of temperature changes. And if you save the woylie, you're saving the little critters as well, and you're saving the whole biodiverse base of that natural environment.
I was going to come back to something I know you recognised, not quite sure when it was during the term that you were a minister, and I apologise if I'm misquoting you, but you acknowledged back at that time the global ecosystem services had been valued at something like $47 trillion, and that was that linking biodiversity to economics. And in those days, that was very early thinking about that loop.
Yeah, that's true, but it's been too hard to sell.
Yeah.
It's, internalise the externalities. Yeah. So I think you've got to find other ways of doing it. And using symbols, I think, is legitimate and useful.
Sorry, Ellen, go on.
I completely agree that using symbols and getting people to do any action is really valuable, and we do that at the AYCC all the time, but I do sometimes worry that people don't see the connections as much as they should. So, I do talk to people who are very happy to save the bettong or to put solar panels on their roof, but then don't see the connection to advocacy or the national or state policies that are actually destroying what they're trying to achieve. So people who will get together and save a national park, but then, if you try and talk to them about saving Victoria's forests, don't want to hear about it. So there's a lot of connections there that need to be made.
Kate, you've tried to use different language, haven't you, in some of your recent documents?
Yeah, we certainly have.
Intentionally?
We deliberately. When we looked at what we were doing with what the thing called the strategic audit, what a name, but that's the report where we examine what's happening in government departments and agencies about their greenhouse footprint, water, waste, energy, etc. You just read a couple of paragraphs in some of our early reports and it's just full of acronyms. Now, a person at the other end of town who's sitting in a bureaucracy will know what they are and will understand that language is addressed to them. But a person who we want to have pick up on what their Department of Health is doing in Horsham or Mildura or Orbost or Bairnsdale isn't going to pick up that document, and if they do, they're not going to find it of any use whatsoever. And we thought that there was a different way of going about this, and we've decided that we need to think about science, policy and people, and that's what the framework for the State of the Environment report's about. We decided we need to think about the language we were using. We needed to drop a few G's because we're Australians, but we needed to think about the language we were using, we needed to get rid of the acronyms, and we needed to use case studies. And the case studies really speak to people. They may not be the great overarching examples that some of us would like to see. They may not change things tomorrow. There may not be a storming of the Citadel tomorrow morning here in Swanston Street, but they speak to people. And what we found was every time we did it, people wanted to come along to the launch. They came along to the launch, they picked up the report, they took it away, they shared it, they told the story. My office isn't going to change things to the extent that some of you would like, but I'm certain of this, that we're changing things to the extent that I can change them about how we communicate, and we had to do something about the language we used.
Geoff, you had a comment?
Personal observation, just from being involved with this, with environmentalism as it affects cities, it's struck me that the issue of mitigating the impacts of climate change and adapting to the effects of climate change for an urban area actually covers just about everything. And so that's the first point. I would be most disappointed, Rob, if the focus went off that. The other thing is, I'm incredibly heartened sitting here thinking that climate change is now a commonly understood thing and that shouldn't be wasted. I think, you know,
we might have another question.
Long ago, nobody had an idea what it was.
Well, we've known about it for a long, long time. In fact, we can go back more than a century. But anyway, Rob, thanks very much for being with us. Thanks for your question.
Thanks to the panel.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to defer to Geoff to make sure we get a good gender balance here. If the young lady would come forward. Welcome. Meet the panel. What's your name?
Hello. Hi. My name's Kim Selling. And, well, I have a notebook full of questions here.
Start at the top and we'll see how we go.
Okay. Well, I guess my general sort of issue is that when people talk about sustainability, there tends to be, particularly in Australia, like a focus purely on environmental sustainability. People talk about sustainability as if it's synonymous with environment, but it isn't. And I'm just wondering, like, we talked about broadening the conversation here, and I know there's a poet in the midst, and Kate has thankfully, I think, spoken on behalf of Indigenous people, at least some of them. And this concerns me greatly. Firstly, cultural diversity, and secondly, how Australia is addressing issues of poverty alleviation and how that intersects with environment and culture in our immediate Pacific region. If I understand correctly, previous Rio Earth Summits acknowledged that culture is actually the fourth pillar of sustainable development, and without it, it will all fall apart. So I'm just wondering if you have anything you can say about how we're addressing culture in sustainable development in our region.
And of course the Millennium Development Goals, the alleviation of poverty, are strong themes at Rio in June as well. So who wants to have a crack? Who wants to make a comment? Social sustainability, cultural sustainability.
Well, social, in the draft outcomes document for the next Rio+20, there is an emphasis on poverty alleviation. There is an emphasis on the social pillar. Sustainability is seen as supported by three pillars: economic, social and environment. There's not an emphasis on cultural. And in Rio 1, there was less emphasis on social. So maybe Rio 3, you would get cultural in it as well. But it's a fair comment to make. With respect, I think it's a fair comment to make because it's part of the whole complex of what's rich and necessary to sustain the sort of societies that are going to seriously address and win these sorts of debates and issues.
Chris?
Yeah. Well, they're not necessarily changing in parallel. That's one of the striking things about it. The things that make for cultural change, the changing communities that make up Australia now compared with 10, 20, 50 years ago, these are sets of changes that we have to bear in mind and bring to bear on our understanding of what it is to be Australia now, Australia in the future, and Australia with bodies of relations in other communities and so on. There is a set of changes that only occasionally impinges directly on the other kind of environmental change we've been talking about, and therein is the complexity.
I don't know that it does. I mean, when you think about climate change, and climate change in the Pacific, for example, there are entire cultures, heritages and languages that are being destroyed by climate change. There is a direct correlation. And also, if you talk about behavioural change, behaviour, that's our cultural values. Culture is our behaviour as well as not just artefacts and museums. It's about our languages and the way we think and the way we act.
Exactly.
Did I just ask my own question?
You may have. But I reckon Kate will have a comment.
I'd like to respond to that question because I remember many years ago being somewhere and taking a university course, taking people through a university course, and people kept talking about, well, culture, that's about objects and artefacts and glass cases, and it wasn't about people who were in the museum. It was just that that's how people saw culture. I like to think that we are changing the culture of our reporting in my office, because that's what culture is. It's about your fibre, it's about your sinew, it's about the things that make us what we are or what we aren't. The point I think that we need to make about changing the culture of reporting, in particularly incorporating Aboriginal people in what's going on in environmental reporting, is it needs to be inclusive and it needs to be collaborative. And we need to be saying that there's a place for the social scientists amongst the scientists. And there was a fantastic Occam's razor on the weekend about exactly this issue, where somebody spoke much more evocatively than I can about exactly that issue. And we need to be incorporating the social scientists with the scientists, not because they should exclude the people who are the germane to their understanding, but because that's where this understanding comes from.
Do you have one more quick question, Kim? We'll let you have...
Can I respond?
Oh, sure.
What your question reminded me of when I was in, I think, Bali or Poland when Penny Wong was the climate change minister.
All morphs together in one word.
I don't know, yeah. And we'd taken 2 young Indigenous Australian people as part of our delegation, as we do every year, and they were talking about the kinds of things they wanted to see come out of the conference. And she turned to them and she said, look, it's not a wish list. We're trying to solve the climate crisis. And, you know, to us we thought, well, that's a bit silly. This is all interrelated, of course. And there's people there who are fighting for women's rights and Indigenous people's rights and culture in the Pacific. But a little bit of me does sympathise with what Penny Wong said, which is that these are huge things and we're having one 3-day summit to try and figure out all the world's problems at once, and how could we possibly hope to come with some kind of outcome out of that? So I think we do need to have some kind of focus. I think it's amazing that we actually are recognising that all these things are linked, but how do you do that in a way that also gives you some kind of outcome? It's difficult.
Very good. Thanks,
Again, you can see that in the draft outcomes document, because you have a number of pages on the principles, the broad scale stuff, and then they revert back into the sectors. What are we going to do with forests? What are we going to do with marine environment, etc., etc. And I think that's that's this dilemma of whilst everything is interrelated, if it becomes too complex, there's a fear that nothing will get done.
Well, look, I hope that we'll get some outcomes if you vote for my question on our say. So
good, great. Thanks for being with us. What are we doing next, Geoff? There's lots of hands up, and I'm going to... Gentleman coming forward now. Thank you.
No questions, but my name's Guy Abrahams. I've had a long life in the arts, running an art gallery, and prior to that being a lawyer. A couple of years ago, I left my art gallery, I went back to university, and I studied climate change at Melbourne University. And what I realised, and what is apparent from this discussion, is that the problem with communication is a manifest one. And I've got together with some other people and set up an organisation called Climate Arts for a Safe Climate, because I think that the arts have something really important to tell us about this thing called climate change, about this thing called sustainability, because it's not only what we understand in our mind, it's what we feel in our heart. And to be motivated to take action, we need to engage our heart as well. And what I've taken out of all of this is, I think, comments that other people have said, is that it's up to all of us, whatever sector of society we're in, whether we're in the arts or we're tradespeople or cooks, to actually personally engage in our own world and with our own peers in these issues. We all need to become activists. I think this is the decade, perhaps, where more and more of us will become activists, like Get Up and like Our Say and like AYCC with 65,000 members. It's no longer a reasonable excuse to say, well, I'm going to sit here and let the others do it, because the others aren't doing it. City of Melbourne representative pointed out that they're trying to save, I think, about 300,000 tonnes of greenhouse gas in Melbourne each year. Unfortunately, Australia is the leading coal exporter. We export each year 300 million tonnes of coal, and that is roughly the equivalent of 300 million tonnes of greenhouse gas. So it's up to us all to get out there. But on the arts, as a means of communication, and even in terms of design, the way reports are designed, the way words are written, it's one part of the jigsaw. We all need to get involved.
Well, I did, Kate. I'm going to come. Guy. Yeah, I'm sure there's something to say. But Kate, we've talked around your table, and I know you've been utilisation of the arts to communicate.
Yep. And we recently went to an exhibition where, in fact, there were a number of paintings on display where exactly that point was made, and made really powerfully. It has an enormous part to play. The arts.
There are some fantastic exhibitions which have been started to be curated around Australia, both in terms of paintings. There's plays. There's novels, there's museums and theatre companies like the Sydney Theatre Company or the Malthouse in Melbourne, or Heidi Museum of Art, are all engaging both in the practice of sustainability and in programming arts-related events that will hopefully engage, inform and inspire people to take action. So
thanks, Guy.
That's my bit. Thank you.
Well, I can even see a new book of poems coming on, Chris, in this space. Yes, lady here.
My name is Patricia Major. I haven't got anything to recommend me except perhaps just the ordinary man and woman representative here. And I find myself really aligning with Ellen. And I hear what the last questioner said about activists, becoming an activist. I hear all the good things that are being done at individual and local level. And it's marvellous and it's encouraging. And as an individual, even imperfectly, you want to do the right thing. You want to turn off the lights, make your compost, recycle. But the last speaker talked about the coal industry and the exporting of huge amounts of coal. And I think nobody on the panel is really addressing what I see as the major stumbling blocks. And that's big corporations with big money and politicians who are really more focused on short-term gain and being in power for power's own sake. And I think, how do you change that? How do we as individuals overcome big psychopaths of corporations? You see it on the news, devastation here, devastation there. They move their business to somewhere else and exploit somewhere else. And you think, here am I making compost, here am I switching off a light. And it's called impotent rage. And I think if I vote, I will.
You're going to be an activist.
If I get my representative into Parliament, that representative will support me. And this last week, as you can see, what's going on. I feel despairing, and I don't want to, because I want to be like Ellen and maintain hope and get up and do something. But how do we address these big black bogeymans that are big business and politicians into power for their own sakes?
Well, I was going to point. David Yenkin was here, and for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the organisation that's been born over the last 5 years or so, and someone might be able to help me. It's made up of former state premiers, Liberal and Labor. It's funded by Luca Belgiano-Nettis, the former managing director of Transfield, a number of academics, and it's about that. It's got a whole range of former premiers, and it's about how do we deal with these big issues, but outside of the Parliament, frankly. I'm sure you've wound Ellen up to say something.
Yeah. Well, I hear you. This is what keeps me up at night, and this is what I despair about as well. Is I'm lucky enough to have a full-time job in an organisation that's prime mission is to do whatever we can to try and get something done about climate change, and I still stay up at night thinking, what on earth is the most effective use of my time? And it's just, I can just do what I know.
What about this big block though, Ellen?
Yeah.
Just this big corporations and the inertia in government.
I think you just have to use the power that you have, and people have a lot of power, and it might not seem like a lot, but your vote is power, your money is power, not necessarily in what you buy, but who you donate to. Your voice is power in turning up at your representative's door and saying this is not good enough. Your shareholder power, that it might not seem like a lot, but we all have that bit of power, and join with other people is my theory of change, and then we have bigger power.
Robert, remind us what a letter's worth or a phone call to a local member?
Sorry?
Isn't there a ratio, a letter or a phone call in terms of replicate votes in an electorate? Do parliamentarians understand an issue brewing in the electorate? Is there a...
Of course, the parliamentarians, you may call it self-interest, but are interested in being re-elected. And they certainly take note of community attitudes and responses.
So write lots of letters and make lots of phone calls and knock on lots of doors.
Can I just make a comment about what I see as essentially the contradictions that underpin everything that you've said? And of course, we live in a capitalist world. We're always going to deal with what capitalism's about. We need to then think about what a capitalist economy tells us. We know, and I come from a family that was vehemently anti-capitalist, we know that capitalism goes on, and we know it can continue to reinvent itself to get over every next hurdle, and we've just watched the GFC, and that's exactly what's happened in some parts of the world. One great example of the contradictions playing out for me in this job was looking at what happened with News Corp, and I don't know whether this will end up in News Corp, but News Corp we've watched very recently implode about the way they've been conducting their business or business model in particular papers. And yet at the same time that they're doing that, and the same time they're producing papers that we all know are, vehement and counterproductive from the point of view of what we'd like to see the mass media tell us and encourage us to do better at. They're also involving themselves in reducing their greenhouse footprint. It's piecemeal, but it's contradictory and uneven, and there are always going to be those sorts of examples. But I'm not any great rap for a capitalist economy, but I see everywhere in everything that we look at co-benefits, and sometimes people will be persuaded to do things because of naked self-interest, and that's about your $600,000 being saved by doing something about your energy, water and waste. And sometimes that's what we've got to do, and that's the best we can do.
Now I need to, remind you, if you don't get too many hands and not enough time, but we're going to try and rip through a few from the floor. Is there a microphone there? Gentleman here's been waiting a long time. If you can be quick, we'll get through as many as we can. Very quickly,
I just wanted to speak on education's behalf. I'm a school teacher at Bentley Secondary College. In fact, Rob, we've met before up at the Save Water Awards in Sydney. The concerns that I have is that I don't think we're giving enough credit to the very young people. They're a captive audience for 13 years. And if you think back to our panel on the stage now and everyone here in the audience, where did we learn our tables and our alphabet? Where did we learn to read and write? And then ask, where are we going to learn our environmental, sustainable literacy? And we can't underestimate the power of that. The school that I work at we built a forest last year. It was International Year of the Forest in May, on over 2,000 square metres of the college grounds, dedicated to it. Kids were dragging babies out of holes that day as we're planting those. There was a fantastic community day of building the forest. We've got a wetland that treats 6 million litres of water, trap it underground, use it to irrigate our ovals in a subsurface irrigation system. Programs that our students have worked on, and they come out of our place with an environmental literacy that will make them the future leaders Now, when we think back now to our school days, I'm 54 years of age, obviously much older than anyone on the podium there. I think back to my education about sustainability didn't exist. And yet now I work in the field and I'm passionate about it, as all of you people are up here and everyone that's turned up tonight. Now, we've had to get it post-compulsory education. We've picked it up. Imagine a community of new people, new generations that are getting their literacy before they even hit the workforce. And that is a powerful group of people. So I don't think we can underestimate the importance of the little projects, the nude food lunches that they do in primary school, that taking their drink bottles and refill them at drink stations. All those little things are part of the literacy that will make them better environmental global citizens.
Right. Well, I'm going to take that as a really good comment. Yes, thank you. And encourage some of you to ask some questions on our say about the national curriculum that Ellen mentioned, and I'm on the bandwagon of the national curriculum as well because I want to get geography on there.
Whilst your point for another speaker, there's a movement towards green schools, and interestingly, some of the research is now showing there's enough data in that within green schools, the kids are actually doing better and the teachers are happier.
Well, that's not surprising.
So there's a momentum for positive change.
We know that about green buildings anyway, don't we, Geoff? Yeah.
As long as we're not waiting for the change to happen when they grow up. I see this a lot. People go, it's so nice that the younger generation's acting. It's like, yes, but we don't have time for 7-year-olds to become the Prime Minister. So, you're obviously doing a heap of great work. So, it's not just the young people who are acting, and we can't wait for them.
Gentleman here has the mic, yeah.
Hi, my name's Sam Miller. I'm glad to say that I'm one of the many empowered members of the Australian Youth Climate Coalition. It's slightly ironic that we're even running out of time tonight, so I'll try and make this quick. One thing that I've noticed in my experience over the last few years, whether it's in sustainability or climate action, is that one thing that hinders action is division. And whether it was seeing division between students and teachers while trying to get sustainability initiatives happening in my school, or whether seeing division between governments at the UN climate change talks in Copenhagen, or whether it was division between the opposition and the government, or even within our public over the carbon pricing debate. It's obvious that division is hindering action on many of the issues that we've been covering tonight. So my question to the panel is, how can we bring about unity? And I'll ask them to, if there's time, to respond to this question on 3 levels. Firstly, how can we bring about unity at a local level? How can we bring it about at a national level? How can we bring it about at a global level to get the action that we need?
Geoff, unity at a local level? Local government?
Inclusion.
Inclusion?
Play to your strengths.
Right. National level, Robert, or an international level?
Well, I wouldn't wait for it.
Right.
And I'm not even sure
so
that it's the goal you should be waiting for.
Hard.
You should be getting out and doing it. Different points of view can be a healthy thing.
We're in a democracy, and all viewpoints must be able to be expressed as far as possible.
But that's not an excuse for inaction.
No, certainly not.
There may be 2 ways forward and you're not sure which is the right one, but the 2 ways might achieve more than no way.
I'm going to come back to you as a former parliamentarian. We've got this really black and white dichotomous division in our national parliament at present, despite the fact we've got independents that are in the mix. Is it a hindrance in Australia, this sort of very aggressive political dichotomy that we have?
On climate change?
Anything.
Well, the one with the majority will is charged to take decisions and implement them and live with them. So
wishy-washy.
It's interesting that, but on the climate change issue, although the targets are the same on both sides of the parliament, the debate is a lot about how to achieve those targets. Whereas in the United Kingdom, the Conservative side in many ways is actually leading the Labor side in terms of introducing prices and costs
I'm trying to think about this organisation, Michael. Do you know the name of it? It's David Jenkins, a member, which is its objective is to remove adversarial politics from Australian government.
Oh, that would work.
No. Go on find out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have to conclude now to keep ourselves to time. and into our 2 hours that we possibly can. Would you please thank with me our speakers, Councillor Kathy Oak. Please thank the UNAA, our SAY, future leaders in the City of Melbourne, and you, the audience. Please utilise our SAY, and if you didn't get a chance to ask your question tonight, make sure you post your question on our SAY. I should also mention that you can register for future Melbourne Conversations and join Melbourne Conversations on Facebook. Thank you very, very much for being with us. Would you please give a round of applause for our